Good morning. Oh, good morning to you up there.
Have you been feeling sad most of the time, losing interest in things you once cared about? You may be experiencing these and other symptoms that are difficult to understand. With a doctor. Learn more about major depressive disorder and a potential treatment option at managingdepression.us.
I was waiting. I didn't want to interrupt you.
Good morning. Good morning. Welcome. Welcome, welcome, welcome. My name is Seth Stearns. I'm the minister of the Spiritual Life and Learning Center, and we are so glad that you're here with us today. A couple of housekeeping items for those who may not be familiar with our space. Restrooms are right out this door, right and then left. If you find yourself in the kitchen, you went a little too far. So just right and then left, very close by. We've got coffee, hot water, cold water. We've got books for sale over here. Also call your attention to our church merch store, where we have a variety of books and other things that either Camp Akita or are church related. We are really excited about today. The Spiritual Life and Learning Center, which is a ministry, a First Community Church. We have a series throughout the year called our Spiritual Searcher series. This is our first event for 2024, and what a way to start. Thank you. Yes, indeed. There was a sign-up sheet, I think, too, if you're interested in getting on the email list, because we also have, in April, Otis Moss III will be joining us for a similar program, a Saturday program, and then preaching on Sunday. But we're going to have some other folks throughout the year as well. So if you're on the email list, you'll be updated, and you'll know what's going on. So let me share with you the format for today. Reverend Thompson is going to be sharing some thoughts with us the first part of the morning. We'll take a short break, and then we're going to come back and have more of a conversation based on the questions that had been submitted and questions that might come to mind for you during the first part of the presentation. And so it'll be, again, more conversational. So if you have some questions, we have note cards out there. You may have grabbed some on the way in, but just drop them in the basket where Shelley is, wildly waving her hand. There she is. So just drop your questions there, and during the break, we'll integrate those and we'll curate those, and we'll take some time for questions. All right. Again, so wonderful to have you here. Thank you. And with that, I would like to introduce our senior minister, Reverend Dr. Glenn Miles.
Let's begin this morning with a prayer, please. Gracious and Holy One, we are grateful for this day and the opportunity to gather, to be inspired and challenged, to be encouraged to love and encouraged to work towards justice. Give us open hearts, open minds, and open spirits as we receive the word on this day. Bless us in all that we do and say in this place. In the name of the one who loves us. Amen. Let me introduce you to our spiritual searcher for today. First Community is pleased to welcome the Reverend Georgia Thompson as our first spiritual searcher of 2024. Reverend Thompson is the first woman of African descent to serve as the General Minister and President of the United Church of Christ, one of two affiliate denominations of First Community. Reverend Thompson is an ordained minister, administrator, theologian, and poet with an impactful history of working in the church and ecumenical and nonprofit organizations. She is skilled in executive leadership, focusing on fiscal management, organizational development, and change leadership. Prior to this call, Reverend Thompson served in the national setting of the United Church of Christ for 14 years. 2 years as Minister for Racial Justice, 8 years as Minister for Ecumenical and Interfaith Relations, and 4 years as the Associate General Minister for Wider Church Ministries and Co-Executive for Global Ministries. Before joining the national staff, Reverend Thompson served in the Florida Conference of the United Church of Christ as a pastor and on the conference staff as the Minister for Disaster Response and Recovery. She also worked in the nonprofit arena for over 10 years in senior leadership positions. I want you to know that tomorrow, as Seth just said, Reverend Thompson will deliver the sermon, When Certainty Fails, based on 1 Corinthians 8, 1 through 13. She'll preach in all three services, 9 a.m. here in Grace Hall, then at 10 a.m. at First Community South at 1320 Cambridge Boulevard, and then back here at 11 a.m. In the sanctuary here at First Community North. Today, she will speak on the topic, the Mountaintops of Our Lives, Spirituality and Justice. Would you join me, please, in welcoming Reverend Thompson to First Community?
Good morning. A little bit of anticipation there, right? It is good to be present with you. Good to see you all. And as I was telling my dear friend Dave Long-Higgins, who's here, conference minister for the Heartland Conference of the United Church of Christ, I mentioned to him this morning, it's nice to be in a place that I didn't have to get on a plane to get to. So I am thankful for proximity, thankful that it wasn't snowing, and thankful for safe arrival, and just really grateful, Pastor Glenn, to you and Seth and the community for the hospitality and welcome and generosity of spirit that I've already experienced since I've been here. So thank you very much. I would be remiss if I did not bring you greetings on behalf of the United Church of Christ and the national setting. Our offices are downtown Cleveland, Ohio, and it is a pleasure to be a partner with you in ministry and to be a part of what God is doing here in this world at this time when there is so much that requires our attention, our care, and our commitment. Thank you for the prayer this morning. I don't know, I feel like I needed that. So thank you. So this morning, they gave me a lot of time. That may be a good thing or a bad thing. You will let me know. I am an introvert, and that means something. Yeah. But this is my calling and this is my work. So for this morning, what you will experience, as an introvert, I have a lot of opinions about a lot of things. So, because I think a lot. And I usually keep those to myself. But I've been given 45 to 60 minutes this morning, and I'm going to use every minute of it to talk about all the things that I think about that I usually don't share. But one of the ways over the years that I share is really through my poetry. And I know some of you have been introduced to Drums in Our Veins. And I'm going to say just a couple of minutes about Drums in Our Veins. Drums in Our Veins was a compilation of poems that I put together in 2018, which was published in like 2023 or something, 2022. But this particular group of poems were poems that I had written over the years, and the poems that are here are actually poems that were written up until about 2015, maybe except for one poem. And if anybody could find it, maybe I should give a prize. So, and then there's some that are from an earlier time. Drums in Our Veins is particularly meaningful to me because it was the first time that I published my poetry. And I had shared my poetry over the years in a variety of ways, but I thought, I came to the conclusion one day that my poetry was not just a hobby, but that it was a gift that had been given to me for community, and that I had not used it in that way. And so after I stood in the mirror, apologized to myself, and made some confessions to the divine, I decided that I would do differently if my poems continued to visit and my poetry continued to be a part of my life. So Drums in Our Veins. The title for this particular book actually came from an encounter with my mother. And I want to mention her before I get started. My mother passed in 2018, and in some ways, maybe that was a catalyst for getting this body of work together. My mother, I was talking with her one day, and I often say my mother had this way of doing verbal drive-bys in my life. So it was never quite anything specific or a conversation, just like a few words dropped into the air that would leave me like staring at a wall or something, thinking, where'd that come from? So this particular day, she was at our apartment, and I was talking with her, and I was walking behind her. I remember this so clearly. And I said to her, I just love listening to Brazilian music. And she goes, yeah. And we're slowly walking through the house, and I said, I think it's the drums. I think I like the drums because I don't understand Portuguese, but I listen to this music all the time. And she said, well, You know, they say that they're people who could hear the voices of the ancestors and the beat of the drums. And I said, what? She didn't look back at me. She just said yes. She said, there are people who can hear the voices of the ancestors and the beat of the drum. And maybe you are one of those people. Hence the title, Drums in Our Veins, right? This understanding perhaps that we're not alone and that there are those who journey with us in a different kind of way. You believe it or not, but for many, that is a way of understanding the world. That's the way that I understand the world. And so I want to frame that, name that as we get started. So there are probably about 4 or 5 poems in here for the morning. We'll see where we get to. Dave's taking time in the back. So if he starts jumping up and down and waving, it means I'm done. So the first poem is entitled, I Am, and perhaps this is a little bit of a self-introduction. I thought you should know a little bit about me, but why just tell you when I could read a poem, right? I am from the Caribbean Sea where the blue mountains rise, where the markets of Kingston bear the fruits of trees, the fruits of bodies bought and sold, dark skin interpreted as being less than human. I am from the bellies of slave ships, sugarcane fields, and white rum, where Jamaican rum cake is dark like skin bronzed in the sun, baked by the sun in a land raped, torn asunder by war, strife, sown by men beating Bibles, singing Jesus songs. I am from the sounds of drums, beating dreams of freedom, rhythms of the soul and the land echoing through the trees, in tandem with softness of breeze, kissing leaves. I am from the market women, the women with babies on their backs working the fields, from Ida and Mary Jane, uneducated, poor, none of them maintained by men, by government, by systems, unsupported. I am the rhythms of reggae, swinging my hips to soca, to salsa, the drums of my blood coursing through my veins, giving life, filtering breath like water from summer hydrants, flowing down streets, cleansing me. I wrote that one in 2015, and I should remember that I have slides. There's a lot going on this morning. So the mountaintops of our lives, and we'll get to what this means. So this was the first slide that went with the first poem. How about that? Isn't that pretty? From the Caribbean. And most of the pictures that are here in the slide are actually pictures that I've taken in my travels. Copyright infringement, you know. Don't want to get into that, so you use your own stuff. Who we are and how we understand the world is shaped by culture, heritage, and our environment. Our identities are informed by many variables, all influencing the ways that we live our lives. And I am no different in that regard. I was born in Kingston, Jamaica, as I said, a descendant of Africans brought into the Caribbean as enslaved people. They were not all slaves. In fact, I would say they were not slaves, those who endured the journey through the Middle Passages. Many were free people who were taken captive and sold into enslavement to support the needs of a plantocracy, which emerged from the colonization of the Americas by Europeans. Who I am has not always been understood in this particular context. There was a time when I solely thought of myself as a Jamaican. This framing was based on an identity solely rooted in the narrative of where I was born. I was born in Jamaica, and that made me a Jamaican. And then there came that moment in my life when my birthplace was no longer enough to contextualize my existence. I wanted to know where I came from. I wanted to know who the people were who informed my DNA, my existence. I wanted to know their names. I wanted to know who they were, and I started searching with no idea of what I would find. I simply knew there was more to me and to my identity. That was the beginning of a journey back to the ancestors, that's what I would call it, and perhaps back to myself. It was as spiritual as any moment I had undertaken with intentionality of drawing closer to God. That journey of many years has brought me to this place today, knowing that I am the child of Isaiah Augustus Thompson, and Amy Bell Adassa Grant Thompson. I am the grandchild of Ida Winter Lawrence, Charles Thompson, Ezekiel Albert Grant, and Mary Jane Stevens Grant. I am the great-grandchild of Joseph Winter, Angelina Graham, Joanna Thompson, Isaac Stevens, Dorlean Murphy, and William Harrison Grant. And I am the great-great-grandchild of Richard Murphy and Philip Harrison Grant. I'm also the child of the ancestors who were brought from Nigeria, Sierra Leone, Ghana, and Kenya. These names I do not know, yet their contributions to my existence are evident in my DNA. I'm also the child of people from the Baltic region, from Mesoamerica, Finland, Scandinavia, and the Middle East. They too show up in our DNA. My journey is their journey. My existence is an act of resistance on their part as my ancestors. And my resistance comes in naming, acknowledging, and venerating these ancestors as I recover and walk in the fullness of who I am. And so this morning, I invite you, as we give pause to these and the other lives who have contributed to who we are, and we give thanks for their spirits that are ever present with us. Ashe, Ashe, Asheo. Silence is always a little unnerving, but it's okay. And so we acknowledge the spirits of those who are with us this morning, an important part of the journey. Raíces is a Spanish word that means roots. Now, I should tell you that I'm going to do poems from Drums in Our Veins, and I'm also going to do some other poems that I've written along the way. Raíces is actually probably one of the more recent poems that I've written. I wrote Raíces last November while I was traveling in Nigeria. And Raíces, as I said, means roots. We are here, born of places unknown, traveling this journey together, searching to find ourselves in a world where our differences are glaringly told as problematic to the peace that could be present in this collective existence of ours. We are not alone. Our desire to know more, a condition of being connected to people and places no longer existent, their spirits stirring us to be responsive to the yearning in our bellies to identify from whence we came, yielding to the desire in our souls. We want to know the roots of these trees, plants from which we were born, foundations contributing to our flourishing. We are far more. The disconnect of our souls is limiting. The ignorance of our roots is debilitating. We stumble and live in fear, missing the light of ancestors present with us in our daily living. We are here, leaves of trees firmly planted, our existence nourished by roots we cannot see. Instead, we feel. experiencing in each day the joy moving us forward into a present, shadowed by knowledge of our past. We are invited to journey with Spirit, to reconnect with why we came. We live into purpose. When we look to our roots, we are far more than promise. We are manifestations of the divine, children of our ancestors. We are here. I want to talk a little bit about spirituality because our identities inform our spirituality. So I'm going to tell you what I mean when I talk about spirituality. You're going to get a lot of Karen Georgia opinions this morning. So sorry. When I talk about spirituality, I am talking about the means by which we are connected to God, to Spirit, to the universe, to whatever name we call that higher power. This is more than the places where we choose to be present and worship in community. It's more than the texts and the scriptures which inform us about the divine or perhaps about our lives. This is how you or I exercise intention, this is my opinion, in being present with God at work in the world, that there's that spirituality, that essence to who we are. This is about our spirits connected with the Spirit of the divine, which some of us also call the Holy Spirit. Our Christian faith is a way for us to nurture and sustain our spirituality. And Christianity, like many other traditions, points to prayer, to meditation, studying the text, to fasting and connecting to community as ways to strengthen our faith and I think to nurture our spirituality. I want to share another definition of spirituality that I found. And this is from, I hope you can see that. This is from Brené Brown. And she writes, she's a favorite of many. She writes, spirituality is recognizing and celebrating that we are all inextricably connected to each other by a power greater than all of us, and that our spirituality brings a sense of perspective, meaning, and purpose to our lives. I really like that. I like that definition, which moves beyond spirituality as a faith-based concept and speaks additionally to connectedness to those around us by a power that is greater than all of us. She further notes that for some people, the power greater than us is God. For others, it's fishing. Some are reminded of our inextricable connection by faith, others by expressions of shared humanity. Some find that religion is the best expression of inextricable human connection that is guided by love and compassion, and others believe that no entity has done more to corrode that connection than organized religion. I'm not here for that conversation today. That's a whole other topic. The research on spirituality points in many directions. And I want to hold us with these two definitions or references this morning for our time, because otherwise that's a rabbit hole. When we start talking about the number of definitions and all that's out there in terms of the research on spirituality. Each of us, I believe, grounds, expands, sustains, and nurtures our spirituality in different ways. There are the more traditional faith-based modes that I talked about earlier, right? And as Brené Brown indicates, fishing gets us there too, right? That how we nurture our spirits is a very individual thing. So there are many ways that we can connect to God and opportunities that allow us to find the sacred in the secular and experience the presence of God in the mundane. My spirituality is informed by my Christianity. I was raised in a conservative Christian tradition. I went to Sunday school at 9:30 and 3:30. And I went to worship service at 11 and 7. That was my Sunday. 9:30, 11, 3:30, 7. Just in case you missed it. During the week, Monday through Friday, I went to a private Christian school, which was maybe about an hour from where we lived. And on Saturday afternoons, my siblings and I could be found playing in the yard of the church that was close to our house with other children from our community. I want to think that maybe my path was designed for me before I even realized it with anything that I just said, except that my siblings defy that as a good theory, because they're clearly not on this course. I was about 6 or 7 years old when I sat down with the Bible, the King James Version, a pen and paper, and started reading my way through the genealogies of the Bible. Let me tell you what. I made notes. I did the math. And decided these numbers don't add up. I don't think any 7-year-old really has that business to do. A little odd. As I got older, I read the Bible with questions and was a natural exegete of the text before I knew what that concept was. I was studying the Bible well before I even knew that I had a call to ministry and service to the church. These were academic exercises for me, facilitated by a wandering in my spirit beyond my understanding. In my 20s, I left the church. And I left the church in the wake of a divorce and an inability to reconcile the notion that God would kill me if I left my husband, which is what I was told by somebody in the church. I left my husband, and I dared God to find me because I was not going back to church ever. I had a change of heart along the way. My journey back to God was made on the paths of the Eno River State Park in Durham, North Carolina, where I would spend my Sunday mornings sitting on the rocks in the river, listening to the waters of the river flow by as the wind rustled through the leaves of the trees as they touched the sky. God met me there. Sacred moments that revealed to me that the divine is more than the words of mortals, and definitely beyond the veiled threats of weaponized religion. I am still alive, twice divorced. I found God beyond the walls of the church. God found me and gave me new life, directly connected to seeking and searching for myself. And I understood anew the words of the psalmist in Psalm chapter 42, verse 1. As a deer longs for flowing streams, so my soul longs for you, O God. My soul thirsts for God, for the living God. Sometimes, like Job, we have to release what we think we know to step into the mystery of the unknown and experience the joys of meeting God in the stillness and well beyond what we have been taught. Knowing God is more than intellect, and spirituality is well beyond what we have been taught. Our spirituality grows as we search for God and God searches for us. Yet the more we know, the more we don't know, because knowledge of God is probably the greatest paradox. uninhibited. Isn't that a cool picture? That's actually me. Running out of the water, fully clothed, in a little black dress, on the beaches of Fort Lauderdale. Because you could wear anything to the beach, really. And that was my outfit for the day. A day at the beach, and yes, I went swimming in the little black dress and everything. You just have to live your life the way you feel like living it. The title of the poem is Uninhibited. How about that? On the beach, clouds rolling by, telling their stories, ancient blessings sung as time marches on. You wait. Sitting in the sands, listening to the waves, grains sticking to wet skin, waters rolling in tandem rhythm, unfettered beauty on display. You wait. The sounds of the ocean bringing the voices of ancestors long gone, the silence of the clouds writing memories of ancestors long forgotten. You wait. Life finds you as the crowds run away from the waters, seeking shelter from the wetness of rain. As the skies open up, the waters pour, you find yourself. Yours is the center, your life, the beauty of the universe. Your existence transformed by a magnificent journey wrought on untamed waters, carrying you beyond the seas. You stay and watch the waters roll in. You realize that the gift of these rains, the gift of this storm, the gods unnamed revealing themselves, a reminder, you are not alone. The burdens ease, the weight shifts, the water pellets sting your skin. Raindrops beat the waters, raindrops beat the sand, raindrops beat the memories away, leaving you whole. Each moment leaves you uninhibited. You dance in the waters of the sky. You welcome a healing promised. You let go of centuries of wonder, realizing that all that is unnamed, all that is mystery, is all that you are named to be. Mountaintop experiences are a particular thing. And when we have those experiences where the divine is experienced, this is often how we refer to them. These are moments when we experience ourselves as perhaps feeling close to God, or we experienced God as revealed to us in meaningful ways. These are the moments where Moses found himself with God on the mountain, receiving the tablets. You know, this mountaintop thing is actually a biblical reference. The disciples had a mountaintop experience when they went with Jesus up to the mountain in the narrative that is recorded in Mark chapter 9. And even the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. talked about having been to the mountaintop in a visionary way as he talked about the possibilities beyond racial injustice. I have had my mountaintop experiences in some unusual places. The Buddhist temples of Bangkok, Thailand, in the ancient churches and cathedrals of Europe, in the Blue Mosque in Istanbul, in the old city. Being at my mother's side as her spirit left her body was perhaps one of the most profound mountaintop experiences of my life, because I experienced God as present in that moment. And I learned so much as she exited this world for the next. In hindsight, I would name those Sundays sitting in the middle of the Eno River as mountaintop experiences. Those encounters were priceless. They allowed me to find what I did not know I was seeking, and I released a punitive and vindictive God who was given to me to keep me mired in discontent. We all have a journey to travel to get to the mountaintop. These are not easy places to get to or to find. We get there, however, when we are willing to find ourselves and to also know who we are. Finding ourselves requires that we confront the truths, and I would pluralize that, the truths of who we are. This is about where we come from, who we are, and calls us to see the light and the darkness, the shadow of who we are. Most of us don't want to talk to our shadow side, but we should. There's a lot to discover there too. The complexities of who we are as compelling as they are unnerving. The truth of ourselves is as much about what we want others to know about us as it is what we choose to hide, even from ourselves. Calvin wrote, "Without knowledge of self, there is no knowledge of God. And without knowledge of God, there is no knowledge of self." Rumi concluded much the same. I believe in the following words: I searched for God and found only myself. I keep forgetting the slides. I searched for God and found only myself. I searched for myself and found only God. Our spirituality calls us into deeper knowing. As we know more about God, we learn more about ourselves. In 2015, I started working on my family history. I had attempted it many times prior. However, that year, I started a Doctor of Ministry program, and it was a class assignment. One of my classes was on family systems theory. And so I started the work in earnest, speaking to family and searching through databases. I found the names of these ancestors who were previously unknown and learned new things about my family. There was also a tremendous amount of data that was missing. I could only go back into the mid-1800s because there was no priority given to keeping copious records of those ancestors of mine who were deemed to be chattel. Names were misspelled. A matrilineal system was present, one which was built on protecting men who raped women and were held unaccountable for the children they created. Birth certificates did not allow the name of the father to be included if the parents were not married. The biases of a colonial system which negated the lives of African people was quite evident in the research. And yet, somehow, these ancestors, they wanted to be named and they wanted to be found. And so over the course of probably about 3 years, I found their names. I learned from my mother that her father was a traditional healer. I learned the same about my paternal grandfather in 2018, many years later, after my mother died. I was having a conversation with my father, and I said to him, they were married for like 57 years. And I said, I learned so much from her. I said, and did you know that her father was a healer? And he went, no, I didn't know that. So was mine. 57 years, and you never talk about those things. That's another project. Because the things that we don't talk about have deep meaning to how we understand the world around us. And in many ways, those are not things that we talk about in Christian community, especially in a Christianity that says that African traditions are problematic, or in traditions that problematize indigenous traditions in general and the spiritualities that have emerged for those people. That's not in my notes. That's for free. So my mother died, and I discovered this thing about my family, that on both sides of our family, there was this tradition of traditional healing. These were deep revelations which brought into question, for me, a lot of what I had learned from Christianity and about Christianity. Were African traditions evil, really evil in the way that I had learned? Were healers and seers witches, or people given gifts for the community? My maternal grandfather was a healer, and he was also a preacher. He was a Methodist preacher. And when my mother kind of mentioned that in passing, after I'd been in ministry for many years, I thought to myself, my nephew was in the back of the car, and he said, "Grandma, that's the kind of thing you tell people." I agree. Another classic drive-by. Yeah, your grandfather was a preacher. Anyway, she's here. These revelations I also experienced as visits to the mountaintop, with a resulting need to once again release what I learned and embrace the divine in new ways. I am indeed my ancestors' child. Their wisdom informs me. Their ways are a part of me. I am a healer and a seer, like my grandfathers, and perhaps my parents were too. But for them, receiving Christianity was about receiving God in a particular way that said that they could not participate in or hold the traditions that they understood were a part of who they are. And that was the way that they raised us. They raised us in the church with a singular understanding of God present in the world, and a full and a purposeful rejection of the traditions of our forebears. Yet the ancestors persisted, and the traditions did not die with them. The mountaintop was the revelation that God is present in the traditions and was present with the ancestors. They too experienced God in the wind and the rivers and the trees, much like I did sitting in the middle of the Eno River. They found God present beyond the walls of the church well before they encountered the church and the traditions that were brought by Europeans and European Christianity, which along the way legitimized hatred and discrimination rather than God's unconditional love for all of humanity. The mountaintop was the revelation that who I am is informed by the knowledge of Christianity and the knowledge of my ancestors and African spiritualities, practices, and rituals of the African traditions. I am because they are. Who they are lives in me. And I would also say that that is a beautiful thing, because I am here because I understand them to be present with me. The mountaintop experiences of our lives are life-giving. Some come with the euphoria and delight of God revealed, expanding our awareness through what is present around us. And some are the rumble and shake shifting our foundation, while allowing us the opportunity to live into new possibilities. And in all of that is the truth of who we are, truths that begin with I am. So here are a few of my I am truths. I am a child of African ancestors. I am a healer. I am a seer. I am a preacher. I am a teacher. I am an ordained Christian minister. I am called to ministry in the Christian church. I am called to leadership in the African traditions of my forebears. I am a child of God. I am the creation of the universe. I am. I'm not sure what that's supposed to be. broken sidewalks. This is actually one of my favorite poems. You know, if you're a parent, you know you have favorites with your children. It's the same. We, inhabitants of time and space, children of lesser gods, brothers and sisters of light, relatives of saints and sinners. We, wounded healers, building magical moving staircases to fantastical dreams, traumatized healers, mending breaches and fissures. Then as now we rise, then as now we hear the drum beats of tomorrow, then as now we chart a future singing songs without a score, then is now. We, the transcendent children of the earth, babies formed from tears, visionaries riding on the clouds, we, the mystery of life, living as seeds, fallen into the cracks of broken sidewalks, finding soil, pushing deep, shattering concrete. Then as now we flourish, then as now we hold tight to each other, then as now we chant incantations, weeping, weaving strength and hope into broadcloth of justice without looms. We, waters flowing free, children of breath, bearers of courage, luminaries of change, marching across broken sidewalks. We, creators of tranquility, children of radiant brilliance, defying obstacles, sidesteppers of defeat, building pathways to our destiny. Then as now we transmogrify, then as now we swim rivers of generational healing. Then as now we dream afloat, riding flotsam, rearranging shards of broken sidewalk into sweeping mosaics of freedom. I like that one. The words of the prophet Micah come to mind. He has told you, O mortal, what is good. And what does the Lord require of you but to do justice and to love kindness and to walk humbly with your God? These days, when I think about justice, I don't only think about doing justice and doing good. I believe that doing justice is an act of resistance. It is a way of interrupting that which has been made status quo around us, including the oppression of people's lives, the erasure of people's dignity, and the theft of people's humanity. Doing justice, these acts of resistance, requires that we live and know God in spirit and in truth. What does God require of you? Your truth. God wants the I ams of your life to be rendered with integrity and authenticity. Our spirituality rests in the confrontation of who we are, all of who we are. This requires, as we say, doing the work. Doing the work. Get to know God and get to know yourself. Get to know yourself and get to know God. This justice we seek in the world requires that we find our way to the mountaintops of our lives, seeing God revealed to us, in us, around us, and through us. Truth is not easy, and yet I believe the invitation to the mountaintop is an invitation to truth, among other things. We are invited to live God beyond intellect. We are invited to know God with our truths. We are invited to see the divine expressed in many ways, making room for us to live spirit. A few weeks ago, I was at a conference meet and greet, and someone came up to me and asked me, what am I asking the church to do? They asked, are you calling the church to fast? Or maybe to pray? I said yes. And more than that, I am asking the church to live a deeper spirituality. The things that consume us, the things that motivate us, become perhaps that much more able to be achieved when we understand that Spirit present with us, Spirit poured forth among us, guides us in ways that are beyond our intellectual capacity. Our spirituality is the place from which we serve the world. Brene Brown's definition assists in identifying community is essential to our spirituality. And our spirituality is as much about the Sunday morning services that move our souls and inspire us as it is about the great outdoors in the season of our choice. My choice would be summer and sand. Thank you. Spirituality can be rooted in Christianity and is equally as relevant when rooted in other traditions. God is more than the boxes, the borders, and the boundaries that we have chosen to create for ourselves. Spirituality is dynamic, changing as we learn, growing as we encounter the world and all of the world. How you live out your spirituality is up to you and is a lived expression of your truths and how you understand God. Find yourself and be who you are called to be. And that's the revisit of the Brené Brown, where she says spirituality is recognizing and celebrating that we are all inextricably connected to each other. A profound truth. That's the title of the next poem. Truth spume within, spawning confrontations with the self, embarrassed to own its aching and longings, resistant to living the life it foretastes, ashamed to live the life it coveted for years. Why be frightened of what it pleads for, hiding itself in a core shrouded in fears? Why be present with hatred and ignorance? Why does it listen to blanching epithets, bruising and wounding its existence? In the silence, it whispers to itself, be who you are. Ride the light of the stars. You determine your worth and your being. You choose the colors to paint your world. What is it learning in this shadowed reality? Wherein lies the source of this strange compulsion to remain in spaces injurious to self, damaging to the flourishing of the soul, flogging joy from the beauty of authentic living? What does it name disruptions to its inner light, sands of doubt thrown on its creative fires, dangers diminishing the brightness of its eyes? Sitting in the rainfall of collapsing normativity, it discovers the false normal cuddled unquestioningly. In the silence, it whispers, be who you are. Explore the expanse of constellations. You create the rainbows appearing in your sky. You sculpt reality from your dreams and fantasies. What it loves pales, fading away. In the resplendence witnessed in others, it forgets. It too defined an intention to shine as brightly as the sun. It clamors, unable to find itself in the sameness of lost identities. An unnurtured spirit, meandering in a maze others made, craving a love it alone can dispense. Comparison a disease destroying its essence. It chooses to surrender to the increasing displacement, yearning to find itself in being true to its unspoken wisdom. From the silence it hears, be who you are. Each morning you are reborn anew, listening to the sough of the ancient sages, holding drops of rain between your fingertips, bearing the power to etch the shape, this uncharted universe. I'm done.
Let's take about a 10-minute break, and then we'll reconvene for an ongoing conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Kroger, shopping with pickup and delivery is the same as shopping in-store. Same low prices, deals, and rewards on the same high-quality items. It's one small click for groceries, one big win for busy families everywhere. Start your cart today at Kroger.com. Kroger, fresh for everyone. Restrictions apply. See site for details.
And right now, you can save when you shop your faves. Just buy 6 or more participating sale items and save 50 cents each with your card. Kroger, fresh for everyone.
we can just lift it. There, now I'm on. There we go. Okay, let's go ahead and reconvene. Are you on? Try
Is
now.
that it?
Are you?
Am I on?
Yeah. Yep. Okay, let's go ahead and come back together. So the questions that had been submitted prior to our coming together today, and many of the questions that came in through today, there's two domains. One is wanting to know you better, and then also wanting to know your vision as it relates to the UCC or the church in general, and then of course some are the intersection of those.
Okay.
So as we have the conversation, we do have a microphone that can go around. So if maybe you have a quick follow-up or you just have a burning question that maybe we didn't ask yet, there'll be that opportunity. I don't suspect we'll get through all the questions, so we did our best to curate and combine questions. You ready?
I was born ready.
So we had, a number of us had dinner last night, and you mentioned that as you move around to the various churches, the conversations surface often about concern about attendance and numbers. And you led with an intriguing comment saying, I think perhaps we're measuring the wrong things. Mm-hmm. Can you talk more about that?
Sure. So I often talk about the ABCs of church: attendance, building, and cash. And I think that those are metrics that we have historically used to talk about what's happening in church, right? So how many people show up on Sunday morning? But I think that there's so much more to metrics than numbers. I think that there's something to be said about impact. And impact is not necessarily or only about Sunday morning. It's about what we do with those experiences, right? And how that goes back into the world. It's about the ways in which our churches are involved. It's about the ways in which all of you provide leadership in your communities. But those are not necessarily things that we measure when we talk about church. So when we talk about vitality and even decline, I think that some of what we're looking at are those historic metrics. And I think that we, for the 21st century, really need to be talking about impact and how the things that we do in the church are changing or affecting the world around us. And that's both the world in our immediate community, but then also in the broader community where we are.
So some of the churches that you're visiting, are there certain, I'm not asking you to name the churches, but in terms of what does that look like with the churches who perhaps are doing that, from your perspective, quite well? Yeah,
I think the churches that are doing that are figuring out how to do Monday through Saturday. That's how I kind of look at it, right? So Sunday morning is really a very specific time in our week, right? And it's very short if you think about the number of hours that we spend in a week. So I think about the churches that are doing things like community daycares meeting a need. I think about the ways that our communities are impacting around feeding programs, whether that's providing meals or ways that they support food pantries. I think about the spiritual care that we give in community, during the week that doesn't require that people come into church on Sunday. But just these, I think, ways that we nurture and care for each other, the ways in which our churches are planting trees, have trees out in camps, and that's a longer conversation, are balancing out, I think, so much of what we see as injustice in the world, right? That our lives, in many ways, as people who are a part of congregations, we are justice advocates. We are present, and I think that those are things that we don't measure. And I think those are things that we're doing well, but those are not the things that we talk about when we talk about what the church is doing and also the vitality of our churches. What we talk about primarily is how many people show up in the pews on Sunday morning, or how many people are registered as members of our congregations. And there is so much beyond the who shows up and how many we have on the rolls to what we're doing. Because I'm sure if you count around here, you all touch lives well beyond the number of people who show up on Sunday morning in any given week. And that's what I'm talking about.
Okay. Possible segue.
Possible.
Referencing a comment you made during the initial conversation. You said that we need to ask the church to live a deeper spirituality. Say more about that.
I think we're very intellectual people. And I think that there's something about spirit that defies our intellectuality. Is intellectuality a word? Thank you. Now it is. We overthink spirit, and we overthink in a way that does not allow spirit to be present with us. We talk about being guided by the Spirit, but I think living Spirit is a totally different thing. I think for some of us that lines up in a very intuitive kind of way, but most of us don't really cater to our intellect, to our intuition. We're really looking for reason, right? So that's the other place, because typically Spirit shows up in our intuition, and then perhaps sometimes it's validated by our reason, but sometimes intuition defies reason. I think when I talk about spirituality, I would like to see us find more ways to be grounded in spirit. And I think we somehow have abdicated that to New Age. That's just New Agey stuff. But I think that if you look at, for example, things like even Christian mysticism, right? You see these practices that quite often we don't have time for. Prayer becomes something on the move, usually when we need something. Meditation takes time, and who has time to sit someplace and just listen? Even if we're going to go with the Brené Brown definition of fishing, right? That's something we have to schedule. So I think that there's the invitation is to find what works for you. And I don't think it's a cookie cutter kind of experience, right? So some people may find that in their prayer life. Some people may find it in meditation. Some people may find it in yoga, right? Some people may find it in fishing and hiking and all those kinds of things. But we have to be intentional about finding our way deeper into God. And what that means in part is that all the things that we do and all the things that we give meaning to, at some point, our inability to care for our spiritual selves, because that's a part of what it is, that inability to care for our spiritual selves is what moves us closer and closer to burnout in the good that we seek to do, because we're not taking the time to, let's go with go to the gas stations of spirit. And I'm not even about gas anymore, because that's a whole other debate about fossil fuel thing. But I think it's that kind of thing. How do we get back to that place where we understand that there's something more than who we understand ourselves to be, and allow ourselves to be comfortable in discovering more of what that is?
And how might the church support, or, well, I'll leave it there. How might the church support that?
I'll go back to Monday through Saturday. I think that there's our Sunday experiences hold possibilities for these mountaintop experiences, and they do, I think, afford us possibilities for spiritual care and for nurturing and all those kinds of things. And, not but, it's an and, we still need places to be in community where we can ask the questions, right? Or be uncomfortable with the missing answers. That it's not always about sitting in a place and receiving, but how are we giving back? And while I'm on that, I do think that the church needs to do better about creating spaces for creativity. That our creativity is an important part of our spirituality. And that I often talk about the challenges that exist in, for example, being a creative, being a poet, and also what that means in terms of being a theologian. Because theology and being a theologian is often experienced as an academic exercise, right? Which requires research and a lot of that kind of, kind of intellectual rumination. But I also think that there are many of us, and I see Dave Long-Higgins in my sights, who are theologians who are writing from a creative perspective, and that we ought to make spaces for that to happen. I think, as I was walking through the space, I noticed the artwork that you have on the wall, that's also a part of our theological enterprise, right? So how do we find our way into creating spaces for that to exist? Because that kind of understanding of spirit is a very individual thing. And it looks different for different people. So again, how do we create those spaces to really kind of nurture the ways in which spirit shows up, whether it's in the written word, the painted word, or for those of us who experience dance or any of those other expressions as spirituality.
Wonderful. Can you please talk more about being a healer and a seer, and how does that manifest itself?
That's what happens when you put your business in the street. So, when I talk about being a healer and a seer, and I was talking with Jane about this in the car. I've experienced myself as somebody who's highly, I'm an empath. That's not on the list. And being a seer is about being able to, and I believe that it's a gift for the community, right? Sometimes that manifests itself as being able to assist people to finding what they need, right? Like forests and carbon things.
Yes. Credits and whatnot.
Yeah. Sometimes it's about being able to experience the experiences of others as a way of helping them to get to where they need to go next. Over the years, I've experienced it as weird. I have learned to normalize that as a part of who I am. The part about being a healer is as much about the ways in which the earth affords us opportunity to heal ourselves, right? So that's about the plants and the trees, and there's the whole science of herbology and herbalism and all those kinds of things, right? But I think that healing is also about this work that we do in ministry, that there's a part of that is about the healing of the nations, and it is about the healing of people's lives, and it is about the ways in which we bring spirit and we bring God, and we allow people to heal the wounds and the traumas that they've experienced in their lives. And I think for me, in a more macro sense, that is also about the commitments that I experience myself as being called to do, and maybe even I experience as a part of my purpose in this life, right? And that is about the justice work, right? Which I call the resistance to some of these social ways that we've allowed people's lives to just not be lived in a way that's flourishing. And so that's my own commitment to racial justice, to also creation care, to religious tolerance, and to, I think, a multiplicity of things that I see that are problematic in the world that I realize that I can lend my voice to. And so that is also a part of the healing. So it's about responses to the world, but I think it's also about those places that we have where we're in need of healing. So, I have people who will call me and say, hey, I don't feel good. What should I take? I'm not going to give you medicine, but I'm going to explain to you that, you might be able, or if you can't sleep or something, things like lavender, right, are good for sleeping. Peppermint is good for for settling your stomach. Nutmeg is really good if you have nauseousness, right? Ginger also works for motion sickness. I could go on, but you get the point.
So we are leaning into an election cycle, and its associative divisiveness. What is the call of the church during this time?
Let me start with something that I think is missing. We also talked about this last night, and I think that's civil discourse. I think that we've allowed our differing political opinions and political leanings to spread in a way that does not afford us to hear each other. Instead, we feel we need to convince each other of to cross the divides that we experience. Most of us exist around people who think like us. Most of us. It is more challenging to sit and to be present in community with people whose thoughts and opinions are different than yours. Now, I would draw the line at thoughts and opinions that are hate-filled, because I don't think there's any room for that. I'm talking about those places where people genuinely are in a different place, that we need to be able to hear each other in order to accommodate, kind of what goes on in the world. I know my sister is watching because I talked to her during the intermission. I don't understand how we came out the same womb sometimes. We just think differently about a lot of things, right? But it doesn't, and we hang out together all the time, and sometimes she'll say things and I'm like, where'd you get that? Like where'd you learn that? Because I don't get that, And we just have she gets up every morning and she makes her bed, and I'm gonna tell your business now. She irons her sheets. I'm like, what's that? I'm like, did mommy teach you that? Because I didn't get that. I only make my bed when I leave my house for several days, and that's just in case something happens to me and they have to bring me home. I want people to think So I think that in the church we have to be willing, and as we go into this election cycle, we have to be willing to hear each other in different ways, right? I think that there are core values that we hold that don't seem to be able to transcend the divide, right? And when it comes to those core values or core issues, we put on the gloves and we go at each other. But is there a way for us to navigate all of that with compassion and love? Like, seriously, you know? And these days, I'm applauding people who vote, because so many people have absented themselves from the electoral process, right? And I may even go as far as saying on occasion, thank you for voting, even if I don't support the decisions that were made with that vote. And perhaps we need to be able to do that as well, right? To just say thank you for voting and leave it at that, and don't feel that we have to berate or engage around the challenges that are presented to our communities about some of the decisions that are being made. Let me also say that the church needs to be willing to show up in the public square. That there's public theology exists for a reason, and that attention to public theology is important, because sometimes we're complaining about the outcomes that we see, but we have not been present in offering a different opinion or supporting those who are offering the opinions that we value.
Okay. As a woman, and a woman of color, what have been some of the challenges and opportunities that you've experienced throughout your career?
The biggest challenge, I would say, and I've said this in places before, is showing up in the skin that I'm in. And people judge not based on what they know about you or even attempts to get to know you. So I show up in spaces and people look at me, and I'm a person of color, and they immediately make judgments, and it's painful, and because it also happens in the church. I have been in United Church of Christ congregations where I have walked in the door and not one person has spoken to me before that pastor or somebody who's expecting me shows up and says, oh, you're here in Georgia? And having those same people come up to me afterwards, after I've been in their pulpits, and greet me with a different spirit, right? I think there's also the challenge of, and I would say that's not just for me, that's for many, the challenge of having what I would identify as meaningful ministry. So, you know, not being able to find a call is a major issue for many. And I should say here that my first call in the United Church of Christ, I served a congregation in DeLand, Florida. I had been in the search and call process probably for over a year, and I had spoken with many individuals in conferences, and what I got, some of the verbatim, was we don't have churches that want black pastors, or we don't have churches that want female pastors. And that people actually said that to me. So when I went to DeLand in I went to DeLand in 2004 as their pastor. It was a new church start, small community, 15 people on the books, 5 show up on Sunday kind of thing, right? I had a master's in divinity. I had a master's in public administration. I had years of experience, but that's where I ended up because that's the call that I had, and they couldn't afford to pay me. I was working for less than nothing. Actually, I was working for $1,000 a month, right, as a pastor. And so I would say that some of the challenges, right, and there are others as well. The opportunity is this, because somebody gave me the mic, and so I think being able to show up in spaces that I probably would not normally show up in has been, I think, some of the greater opportunity. And I think, like I said, I talk about justice and I talk about resistance. Quite often I'm in rooms that look like this, or I'm in rooms that are predominantly male, and just showing up as a woman makes a difference, right? And being accessible and learning, you don't take everything personally, because I can't. Because honestly, if I took every experience that I had personally, I wouldn't be in the United Church of Christ. I wouldn't be a part of the church. But I also understand that my presence and my life, I came with a purpose. And every day I live into that purpose, which I don't think that purpose is static. I think it changes, and I think we come with purposes, and that we live through those purposes. And so somehow I ended up here. Y'all gave me a microphone, and I'm going to continue to speak because I think it's important, not just to talk about where I am as the general minister and president of the United Church of Christ, because how I got here was really about persistence, because any of those experiences could have led me to say, I don't want to do this. And as I said in one of those poems, right, why should we show up to places that cause us pain consistently? None of us want that. And yet those are some of the experiences, right?
How did you end up in the United Church of Christ?
Oh, honey. So, I'm ordained Baptist, General Baptist, North Carolina, and I went to seminary at Union Theological in New York. And when I went to Union, there were many of my colleagues at Union who were United Methodist, United Church of Christ, and I think for me the bigger issue was not just about my own call to ministry. That piece I would speak to in naming that I understood myself as called to serve as a pastor at the time. It wasn't my thing. That's a different story and a much longer story. And I was vexed, very vexed, about feeling that God had called me to serve as a pastor. I'm an introvert. And so there were lots of other things that I had on my list, but this was the calling that I had. And so being in the Baptist church was not the place that was going to afford me the opportunity to live into that. The second thing is my children. And I have 2 sons, and it was important for me to choose a place to be in ministry, because where we are in ministry is a choice, right? And so confronted with the choice of where I wanted to do ministry, I wanted to be in a place where my children would be okay. And that was important for me. And so the United Church of Christ, I believe, is a place that when they choose where they want to be in ministry and where they want to be, raise their kids, if that's a choice that they decide to make, I believe that the United Church of Christ could still be that for them. And I think a part of my leadership and a part of my commitment to leadership is that I want this church to be a place where my grandchildren could also be present and flourish and call home with whatever it is that they choose to be and understand themselves to be as individuals. And I have my grandson is highly functioning, but on the autistic spectrum, and so his neurodivergency is something that I also think about quite often when I think about what it means for us to be church. And so the multiplicity of who we are is also a part, I think, of why this place continues to be home for me. And the parts that I don't like, I take to my therapist.
Very good. I think Your fellow introverts have appreciated your identification of being one. How has that served you, and how does it present challenges to you?
It's exhausting, the extroversion. It has served me well because it allows me, even when I speak, I'm always reading the room and, studying people, and I like that. I think it also has afforded me the opportunity to really think about what I want to say and to be intentional with my words. I think words are a gift. And I don't take what I say lightly, and so having the time to do that. I retreat, so my house is my cave, and when I go home, that serves me well. I travel quite a bit, so I do a lot of this, right? And so when I leave here on my 2 hours back to Cleveland, it may be that I'm in the car and I'm just quiet. Maybe the Doobie Brothers, Steely Dan, Earth, Wind, and Fire, I don't know. But, just finding the quiet, and that's important for me, is just being able to be still. So I think it has served me well because it has allowed me to accommodate the stillness that I need sometimes for my life, And I think it's also in the stillness that I find God, but I also experience the presence of my ancestors in that way as well. And it serves me well because I'm a writer, so I'm always percolating.
Mm-hmm. What is your vision for the UCC? What is it that you hope you are leading the UCC towards?
Yeah. The UCC is a very diverse place. And I think that we often start with, we're a progressive denomination. And that is true. For me, I talk about progressivism not in terms of maybe some of the forward-thinking ways that we come at justice issues or a plethora of things. I find that the landmark for me around our progressivism is actually the breadth of who we are. That I think of our progressivism as the predominant maybe trait among us. But we have a lot of conservatives that are a part of the United Church of Christ, and I believe that that does not hold true for a lot of places because most of our traditions tend to be monolithic. It's what I talked about earlier. We are most comfortable in being with people who are like us, right? So the United Church of Christ, we're, red churches, blue churches, purple churches. We run the gamut of large churches, small churches, rural churches, small town churches, big city churches. It's all of that. And I think in this moment, a part of what I would like to see is the United Church of Christ really understanding what it means for us to hold that breadth of diversity among us. We're also English-speaking, Spanish-speaking, German-speaking, Hungarian-speaking, Marshallese-speaking. We have a plethora, Korean, of languages, but it's not necessarily the thing that we talk about when we talk about the United Church of Christ. And so I want to see us live with intention into what it means for us to be a big tent, to hold this... and to name that this commitment that we have made to agree to disagree is not an intellectual enterprise, but that we're intentional about creating the spaces to hear each other and to learn how to live with the differences. I also believe that it's probably the thing that will allow us to move beyond the 21st century as a church, right? That when we came together in 1957, I think that there was this thing that was created. And in the midst of the United Church of Christ is already this diversity that is present in the predecessor bodies that informs who we are. But also, more and more, the United Church of Christ is made up from people who are coming from other traditions into the UCC, so that we are well beyond the traditions that informed our history. And so how we navigate the tensions of this diversity, I think, is the thing that I want to hold up before us over the next years. What does it mean for us to learn and grow together when we have different opinions, different theological priorities and values, and how can we learn from each other rather than experiencing the differences as problematic?
Here's an easy one.
My favorite color?
What's your view of reincarnation?
Oh, okay. I don't know that I have a view about reincarnation. However, what I would say, which kind of is about some of the conversation we had last night too, I don't know about reincarnation, but I believe that the spirits of our ancestors are very present, and that within our DNA we're informed by things that we don't know or understand, right? And so when I talk about, for example, being a healer, I remember having the conversation with my mother at one point and saying, there have to be people. This is before I learned all this stuff about my family. I said, there has to be somebody in our family who was a healer. I said, because I have all this knowledge about like herbs and plants. I said, but I've never studied that, right? And so I think that there's something about my ancestors that is present in that, right? Quite often when I write, I talk about channeling, because that's how I experience my writing, as a conduit of bringing words, perhaps from someplace else. So I don't know that I have any specific opinions on reincarnation, but I have enough other stuff floating around my head that perhaps informs that, but not in a specific kind of way. But I do believe that the spirits of the ancestors are present with us, and in that, I think that who we are keeps coming back for generations.
As a writer and a poet, you have struggled to find your voice. Mm-hmm. What counsel would you give to folks who are trying to find their voice? There's something to be said about time. And finding voice also means having the willingness to use that voice. And it really comes, I think, with being settled to some extent with who you are. That quite often our greatest place of avoidance is with ourselves. There are things that we, places about our lives where we want more of this, less of that. We're constantly in the projects of our lives. It's like fixing up a house, right? As soon as you fix one part, you realize that there's another part, and so you're constantly, but then when do you live in the house, right? And so I think that there's this invitation to really accept who we are, that we can't constantly be fixing, that we just have to live into who we are. And I think for me, to use some I statements, for me, I think it was coming to the fact that who I am is who I am, and normalizing that, right? That there's so much that filters into our lives, and as a woman, there are all these messages about what we should be, who we are, whether it's as a writer or a theologian, right? And so when I started writing my truth and naming my truth, which is about as much about who I am, it's about what I don't like, it's about how I identify. And I think when I started settling into those things and I started realizing,
what do I care what people think? I think I was better off for it, right? So letting go of some of those places and need for external validation, because the external validation is a thing, and we want that. But sometimes we have to be able to get over those places in order to be ourselves and to live ourselves and to speak out of that authenticity. And when you find your voice, use your voice. And voice comes to us at any given place in our lives. And I think we have to be willing, because if it comes and we don't use it, then it moves on someplace else. And we see MJ on Broadway in December, and there's this part in the play where Michael Jackson comes in and he has a song and he says, I have this song and I really think we should do this. And they're like, oh, Michael, that's so different. And he says, yeah, but I'm afraid if I don't do it, God's going to give it to Prince. Use it.
What does the beach bring to you?
Oh, life. I love the beach. I've never met a beach I didn't like. Next question.
In your book, you organize your poems around traditional African drums. Can you talk about how you chose the poems with the drums?
So maybe some of that is about intuition. Drums have character, And so a part of it was actually like my own reading and learning about the drums and the different kinds of drums. And then in each section is paired with a drum, but it also has a subheading, right? And so it was my own sense of how those poems connected with that subheading. I should also say that I've been working on my next book of poetry, which is entitled Painting Rainbows with Teardrops. And so each section of that work actually has a color and is actually associated with the stages of grief.
If you don't mind, can you talk more about how you landed on the title?
Oh, that title?
Mm-hmm.
So Painting Rainbows with Teardrops, I would say, is a project that emerged out of my own need for healing. My mother died in April of 2018, and out of that I published Drums in Our Veins. But it was hard for me to write. So all these poems were written before my mother died. After she died, I had a very hard time writing. So she died in 2018, and there were lots of things that happened, including getting elected to serve as Associate General Minister for the United Church of Christ, moving back to Cleveland because I was living in New York at the time, and then COVID happened, 2020. And as we were in the process of moving into lockdown with COVID, that first week my father died. He died on the 21st of March of 2020, and then we all got COVID. My sister, my nephew, and I, and it just felt like there were just these insurmountable losses, right? But for me, so much of that was coupled with the communal losses, right? Because they're personal losses, and there's all of that. And so I started thinking about grief and how we accommodate grief and our inability to really, I think, have good rituals around grief, but also the ways in which the COVID moment had robbed us of those opportunities to be present for each other. So I think about the rituals, things like potlucks, right? Gathering with people, or being able to have funerals. My father did not have a funeral. And so as I started thinking about grief, and the tears that accommodate and accompany our grief, I started thinking, about our tears creating rainbows, and what it means to find joy along the way through our grief. And so this title of Painting Rainbows with Teardrops was born, because I think that there's something about our grief that is beautiful and helps us to move into a space to create beauty in the world.
Beautiful. As we continue to fight for justice, the issue of resilience comes to mind. What have you found supports resilience in the ongoing fight for justice?
Our spirituality. Our spirituality, I believe, is the deepest context and source for our resilience. So, for example, when I think historically of the lives of African people in the Americas, right, people went back to their understanding of spirit, right? Whether that was the Black church, right? Or if you look further back into the ways in which Africans kept practicing their traditions beyond these experiences of even being beaten, that they held on, right? This understanding that there's something that holds us that is greater than who we are is a magic, I believe, that feeds us and nurtures us. And that when we, resilience is that thing that allows us to do things that are beyond ourselves. That's how I think about it, right? Because most of us, if we just think about our human capacity, don't really feel that we have the capacity to do some of the things that we have undertaken and accomplished, right? So it's I think that rooting in spirit that builds our resistance to do these things. And again, when I talk about spirit, I'm talking about spirit the way spirit finds you where you are. Notice I didn't talk about Christianity, I didn't talk about Buddhism, I'm talking about spirit and how we live and understand spirit.
As a predominantly white church, as we are, what are the opportunities and barriers in terms of social justice, both in activities and in mindset?
I think that the opportunities are many. The barriers are what we create, and actually is what we need to surmount to our own ability to participating in the opportunities that are presented in front of us. And I would say that because in predominantly white spaces, which as a woman of color, that's where I function, because I provide leadership in this denomination, which is still more than 80% white. And when I think about being in these spaces, I think it's important for white people and for white institutions, which are still privileged and hold a lot of privilege, to be able to use that privilege on behalf of, right? So on occasion, we need to be able to be advocates and to speak the truths of others and to name the truths of others. I think the greatest obstacle is fear. And I say that fear is an obstacle because power is real and privilege is real. And most of us don't want to relinquish the power and the privileges that we hold. We experience those sometimes in traumatic ways, right? And if you find yourself in a better place, why do you want to, release that, right? So how do we overcome the fear of feeling that if we advocate for people over here, they're going to take away from us something that we have or hold? And so I think overcoming the fear is the biggest issue in the predominantly white spaces. And I would also say making room for other voices is the other accommodation that we have to make, and that is oftentimes interrupted by our own fear as well.
When you think about leadership, what are the top 3 traits that either you try to focus on in your own style of leadership, or that you observe or look for in others?
I think when I think about serving as a leader, I think for me it's important to be able to hear from other people. And so leadership is not about what I think or what I feel. I get to make decisions, right? And informed decisions, if you will. I think a good leader is a good listener, right? So I would say that's a primary. I think the second is that a good leader has a very high level of self-awareness, right? And that's both to the light and the shadows of your life. Because if you, as a leader, if you are not aware of your shadow side begins to lead, and it skews your ability to be effective as a leader, right? Because the shadow begins to take over, and your shadows are about your fears, right? And it goes back to what I just said. I think the third thing is that a leader has to be willing to take risk. And that risk is not just in the choices and decisions that we make. There is a risk to showing up. Just showing up and being present is a very risky venture for many of us, because as a leader, quite often, you're coming in and you're pushing against the grain, which means that everybody's not going to like you. That's a risk, because most of us want to be nurtured, cared for, embraced, and as a leader, you're making decisions and you know that people are not necessarily going to like it, but you also have a sense of vision. This is my 5th, I'm counting. You asked for 3. But you're coming with a vision also, and being able to accommodate that vision and see beyond what people are able to see is important, and realizing that vision requires, I think, also a level of risk. 2 bonus.
Okay, very good. Freebies. What's the question you were hoping I might ask that I didn't?
I didn't have one. I actually tried to stay away from preconceived ideas and things about spaces that I come into, because it allows me to accommodate the space in a way that says, this is not about me, but what about the space, what the space has to offer and what the space needs. But my favorite color is pink.
Thank you. And your favorite song?
My favorite song? Mm-hmm. Oh, man.
Artist, maybe artist.
Okay. So, yeah, that's hard. So I don't necessarily have that, right? So one of my favorite songs, and I would say it's my theme song, is Alicia Keys' This Girl Is on Fire, for obvious reasons. But I'm going to tell you, I'm going to tell you who I've seen in concert. I've seen Carlos Santana. I love Santana. I think he's one of the greatest guitarists of this age, right? I've also seen Michael McDonald. Mm-hmm. I love his music. Love the Doobie Brothers, and I'm a huge Steely Dan fan. That era of music, I've also seen Tina Turner in concert. One of my all-time favorites. I've seen Coldplay, also another favorite. Luther Vandross, may he rest in peace. Tina too. So it depends on what kind of mood I'm in. But I'm all over the map, and I'm always up for where's the concert? Oh, that's going to require a flight. And so I convinced my sister, Carlos Santana is in residence in Vegas. And so I just bought tickets to go to Vegas in May to see him. This is probably my third time seeing him in concert. But I love Carlos Santana.
Good. What question hasn't been asked yet? Yes. Yeah, please, give us 1 second. Jen, you might want to double check that song. Well, let's just go ahead. We'll repeat it if we can hear it.
When you feel that your calling is one for justice, and professionally, you are also called to fight for justice, what advice do you have for not letting that, weigh you to the point of burnout, or like, what suggestions do you have for like refueling? I don't know.
I think I got it, but I just want to make sure everyone was able to hear it. The question was, in the persistent fight for justice, what recommendations, suggestions do you have for staying refueled?
We have to have moments where we step back from the work, right? And stepping back from it is not an indication of abandonment. It just means that we have to take care of ourselves. So I'm all about investing in a good vacation. And my best vacations are on a cruise ship, pardon the carbon footprint, but it affords me the opportunity to totally disconnect differently than when I do land-based vacations, because I can just throw my phone to the side. I'm not buying ship Wi-Fi, not at $5.99 per minute. And so that's important for me to disconnect. But I think we all have ways that we can disconnect. And so sometimes that means turning off your phone and going for a nice walk, or turning up the music in your house and having a good dance, right? Or maybe even having friends over, right? Because extroverts in the room, I realize that you need that to recharge. That it's not, that for some of us, it's not about the isolation, but it's about the engagement around other things and other possibilities. So I think time, stepping away and taking care of ourselves.
Yes. Can you hold for 1 second? Thanks, Jen. Thank you.
So during this wonderful conversation with you, I was taking some notes, and when you were talking about justice, you said God requires of you your truth. I'm 68, long journey, most of it as a gay man growing up in the Roman Catholic Church, searching for truth. And my question is, how does one know when your truth is really true, given the human capacity for self-delusion, righteousness, and our need to be loved?
It's a question of discernment, isn't it?
Yeah. Seth had the answer. Seth said. It's a question of discernment. You know, I think we all occupy closets in our lives, right? That's not just a human sexuality issue about, you know, the heterosexual normativity that we've granted. And I think that for many of us, what we're pushing against is what has been identified as normal and how that presents itself to how we understand ourselves, right? So at some point, when you started talking, I was like, whoa, that's a lot. A gay man in the Roman Catholic Church, right? But that is a truth, right? And if you identify that as a truth, that I'm a gay man in the Roman Catholic Church, and you identify the truth of what that means, right? Then that allows you to live the possibility of something different than what that would present. Because just by saying I'm a gay man in the Roman Catholic Church, many of us in here go like, whoa, because it says something, and what we're living is something different, right? Which is a part of the discernment, but it's also, I think, the courage that we need. So if you, and when you evaluate and think about your life, there is a truth about you, right? And truths that begin to emerge. So when I talked about my truths, it's often, when I talk about being a seer or a healer, I don't often talk about that in community. I don't often talk about, you know, ritual and practice around African traditions, because to say, here's my truth. I am an ordained Christian minister who practices African traditional religion, right? And that's a huge truth to hold, because immediately, you know, it's like, what does that mean? But that's my truth. And the interrogation is a part of our discernment, but the judgment, which is external, is not something that we have to hold. But it takes courage. Living is courage.
David, I'll get you in 1 second. Or we can go. Sorry, Jen. Okay.
Yes. I would be curious to know, in thinking back over maybe 50, 70, 80 years, who are 3 or 4 of your favorite theologians, and what were their essence points, their big points?
My favorite theologians. I'm going to start with Martin Luther King Jr. We often think about his activism, but not his work as a theologian. And in many of his speeches, we find a theology that emerges around his work, right? I'm going to go with an unusual one here. I experience the writings of Bob Marley in a very theological way. Bob Marley? Bob Marley, the musician. People don't think about Bob as a theologian, right? But Bob has a lot of God talk in his music, right? And the third, I'm gonna, and these are all men, but there are other people because these are the first that come top of mind. So I would identify Bob, and most people wouldn't think about Bob as a theologian, because quite often when we're talking about theology and identify theologian as a word, we're often thinking about Christians, and Bob is not, right? So I would also name the writing of James Cone, right? And James Cone, when James Cone talks about black theology. But when I was at Union, Dr. Cone, I remember I took his systematic theology class, and he said the following. He said, "We are all theologians, theology is God talk, and we all do God talk, right? And so I want to reframe in my choices, because the God talk, I think, is what influences me in some of the people. So I would also name probably like Renita Weems, Kathleen Norris, I think has some very profound things in her writing. Brene Brown, I think, gives us a lot of good theology too. And I think it's also, perhaps when I talk about theologians and what informs in terms of theology, I'm not necessarily thinking about Christian ruminations and writers, because I would probably also throw in there Malcolm X.
Molly?
I want to go back to what you had just touched on earlier about neurodivergence. And in our thinking about intersectionality with justice movements, we talk a lot about racial justice or LGBTQ justice. And I'm wondering if you have specific ideas or a vision for the church in terms of disability justice.
Disability justice is huge. And I think for me, it's not just about ADA accommodations, right? I think that there's something about invisible disabilities that requires our attention for this day, right? And I think one of those, I appreciate the reframing of language. So, now that we're talking about neurodivergency and what that means for the church, even in terms of the ways in which we accommodate people and what we expect in terms of behavior from people when they come into spaces. We have a lot of mental health issues around us, and that shows up in a lot of different ways. And there are also, I think, a lot of people who absent themselves from communal spaces because they are not able to adapt to the patterns of behavior and the normativities that we expect of people's presence. And so I think that those are barriers that present themselves when we talk about the church as a space for all people. And so I think it's probably the next huge set of justice issues that we need to begin to accommodate, because this country does not do mental health care very well. We also don't do very well about care and accommodations around neurodivergency in many ways. And I think one of the biggest places where that shows up is in our schools, and what that means for families who are trying to be present in those ways. I'm convinced that one day my grandson is going to be a minister, so y'all better figure that out.
Reverend Johnson?
Hey, Seth, we have one more.
Oh, sorry. Yes.
Hi, thank you so much for coming, and I really appreciate that we have the opportunity here as a church to have you. One thing I would take away, I've had an ecumenical journey to get to this place, and I'm in my last year of seminary. And I do feel really grateful that I have studied some of the theologians that you mentioned. Going to the Catholic Church, one of the tenets of the Catholic Church, and I have a master's of theology in Catholic theology, that we embody God through culture. And so one of the gifts of the Catholic Church is that through the many cultures of the world, we express our faith. And so I think of things like Diana Hamilton, who's here in Columbus, for example. I would say listen to some of her music if you're not familiar with it on the way home. And then also Nathaniel Bassey. And they came to me from the Ghanaian community here, the Ghanaian Catholic community. I have a godson in that community. And so I think sometimes about bringing that kind of music to our church, but also I wonder sometimes about the theology that some of the existing artists have. I'm not quite sure what it is, so I don't know that the theology matches. But I feel like we're all one. I'm a Disciples of Christ. I'm hoping to be ordained. So I believe in the unity of all Christians. And so I loved all of your message. And what I would say is, how do we speak to that truth? And how do we bring the various cultures and the spirit of those cultures? I think we're very open to that. And I just feel that music is a bridge. So I would just say I would love to have more diversity in our musical expression in our affiliated congregations. And I wonder what your thoughts are. Thank you.
Yeah, music certainly is one of those, I think, places that bridges the divide. But I think one of my challenges when we talk about music is that, we're willing to pull in some of those cultural adaptations, like music from different communities and stuff like that. But we're not as quick about inviting people from those communities, or learning, or engaging with, or going out and being present with, right? And if we're not willing to experience that, then I find it challenging as to why we should have that in our spaces, right? So back in the days when I was doing racial justice work, I challenged. There was a church that was doing training, racial justice training. And so they put together a group of maybe it was 12 people who were working with me to plan this event that they were doing, with the understanding that this group of people was going to provide some of the leadership. So I suggested to the group, all white people, I said, well, one of the things we talk about in our church is people coming in. We want people to come, right? So I said, between now and the next meeting, I would invite you, each of you, to go visit a place that is different than your church, right? That could be theologically, it could be racial. I mean, there are lots of ways that differences show up, right? But you find someplace that's different from your church and show up. And they said, why? Why would we want to do that? And I said, but you're asking people to come and be present with you. And it's only, you should have an experience of going and visiting someplace else. Out of the group of 12, one person took me up on the offer. And so sometimes when I think about music, I think music should teach us something. It has the ability to teach us. And music, I think, is one of also those deeply spiritual things, right? So whether it's Ghanaian or any place else, right? It allows you to experience God, I think, present in those cultures, In the New Century Hymnal, we have a lot of, which is the UCC hymnal. There are a significant number of hymns that are coming from other cultural contexts, right? Including Native American, Native Hawaiian, but there are also justice issues that are related to those spaces and those cultures. And so, how are we talking about those issues? And while I'm on the New Century hymnal, it has one. And only one Jamaican song in there, which is actually a communal hymn, Let Us Talent and Tongues Employ. So there's also things that are missing from our hymnody. And so I think being able to make those accommodations, are important. And I wish you every success in your discernment and your journey towards ordination.
Glenn, if you'd be willing to close this in prayer, and while you're coming up, I want to say, Reverend Thompson, thank you for the conversation.
Thank you.
those who are able, please stand for the prayer. God of light and love, we're grateful for the light and love that has been shared this morning. We're especially grateful for the poetic way we've heard truth spoken. Allow us now to continue to keep our minds, bodies, spirits, and hands open and willing to serve you wherever we may find ourselves. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you. So there'll be an opportunity to sign books, yes? You're welcome to do that.
Yes.
And then, folks, I'm going to be putting a slide up with the QR code. And if you could just take a look at it, we'd love your feedback on the event, if you'd be willing to do that. Oh, there it is. It's already there. Like magic, like magic.